Good morning. I always like to bring it up myself and make sure it's not doing anything weird. Good morning. Good morning, those of you in the room. Sorry, Dawn's telling me to talk louder, so I'm going to talk louder. And good morning to those of you who will be joining us on Facebook Live, either live or later on. We are so excited to be able to provide this morning class, both in person and virtually, for those of you who want to catch it later. This morning we are going to be talking about labyrinths, and so before we jump into that, let's go ahead and open with a little prayer affirmation. We gather today knowing that our absolute self is ever present. We are grateful for practices throughout the day that create space to feel that connection and receive guidance from Source. We know that even though the path may wind, each step brings us closer to Divine Mind. And so it is. Amen. So I always like to tell you guys why I chose a topic, and so this week is a little bit of a departure. It's not a book that I read and doing kind of a report out. The idea was brought on by the recent trip to Unity Village, and for those of you who were out on the trip, or if you've ever been to Unity Village, you may know that in a parking lot at Unity Village they have a very large labyrinth. And it's always one of my favorite things to do when we go to Unity Village is to walk that labyrinth. And this particular trip, that labyrinth walk was a powerful one for me. They're always great, but I think sometimes just your mind is in a different spot or you're at a different place in consciousness. And so I had a really nice labyrinth walk experience. And on the drive home, I just kept thinking about it and thinking about the labyrinth and thinking about, those practices that they're not hard to do. It's just you have to set aside the time to do it and then actually go and do it, which is sometimes the biggest hurdle in our busy lives. And so I was just thinking about that and why, for some of you, most of you probably know, but some of you may not know that we have our very own labyrinth here at Unity of Springfield behind the teen house. And I very rarely see people walking on it. And to be honest, I very rarely walk it. I do occasionally. I'll think, oh yeah, it's over there and I've got some time and I'll go do that. But I very rarely schedule a time to go and say, I'm going to go do a labyrinth walk and I'm going to schedule time. It tends to be an afterthought of, oh yeah, it's over there and I've got time and that would be really nice to go do. And so I just thought I would talk about labyrinths today. And so what is a labyrinth? A labyrinth is not a maze. So there's a distinction between labyrinths and mazes. A labyrinth offers only one route to the center and then back out again. And no matter where you are within the coherent circuits of the labyrinth, you can always see the center. So you're ever winding your way in and out towards the center and then back out again. There's also no obstacles to overcome. There's no tricky paths, there's no dead ends, there's no switchback, nothing going on that you have to think about as far as the path. It's just the path is the path and you go one way in and one way out. So you're not having to make decisions about the journey as you go through. And it's said to be one of the oldest contemplative tools used for centuries for prayer, ritual, initiation, and personal or spiritual growth. So that made me think about the history of labyrinths. Where did they come from? How did this practice come into being? And so what I found was that the word labyrinth was first documented in Greek mythology but the definition in Greek mythology more closely described what we would now call a maze. It was a tricky path. It was people were put into the labyrinth, and it was a test of wills. And there's one Greek mythology story where there was a minotaur in the labyrinth, and people were put in there, and you had to avoid, being eaten by the minotaur. And so that's not what we would know today as a labyrinth. What's interesting to me is that labyrinth designs are seen on coins that have been recovered from as old as 430 BC.
Wow.
And so these were, precious metal coins that were stamped with an image of a labyrinth. We don't know how those were used or why that was important, but we see that image. You can also find labyrinth images on ancient pottery, in basketry, in etchings on the walls of caves and churches, and that's across the world. And that was the other interesting thing to me, is that these depictions have been found by archaeologists around the world in different cultures, in different settings, and these are cultures that didn't cross each other. So we're talking about labyrinth patterns in ancient Rome. We're talking about them in Egypt. We're talking about them in Native American culture. So all of these cultures that were at different times, and they're really, from what we know, there wasn't a huge crossover of these peoples and these cultures. So I think for Unity, what that says to me is that the labyrinth pattern, that the idea of the labyrinth is then a product of divine mind, which we all know, right? But for it to show up in so many different places and have, and in all of the uses, there is some kind of a spiritual factor, whatever the religious belief or spiritual belief of any of those cultures, they can kind of tie the labyrinth use to some of those things. So it says they were historically used in group ritual and private meditation. Now, some of that prehistorically, the labyrinth pattern, they believe, may have been used to trap malevolent spirits or for ritual dances to honor sacred ancestors. And so they have found these labyrinths that were built. There was a large portion that I was reading about fishing villages, and there were labyrinths that were built on the way to the boats. And the thought was, they believe from what they can find that some of these labyrinths were used, that the fishermen would walk the labyrinth before they went out onto their fishing boat to trap any, spirit that might keep them from catching fish when they went out there. There were also other places in front of more like religious buildings or temples, and they felt that some of these were used as a way to connect to your ancestors before you entered that space. So that finding the center of yourself was finding that connection to ancestor, which we could also just call source or spirit or divine mind, all of that. So that was just really intriguing to me, that all of these different uses of that labyrinth. Like I said, some of it was ritual dances. There would be group dances that they found picture depictions of where, a group of people would be in the labyrinth at the same time, and maybe there was a ritual dance part to it, and they would all join in the center. And that was about connecting to ancestor and connecting to spirit as well. So it's just always interesting to me how many things that we find within different religious dogmas and just spiritual practices that everyone kind of had the same idea, might have used it a little bit differently, and then it changed and morphed over time, but it was still there. So at some point, there's also a lot of labyrinths found in historical cathedrals, and so at some point the labyrinth was adopted by Christianity to symbolize a pilgrimage journey or a path of prayer. And so in some of these cathedral spaces and other spaces, they theorize that for those who couldn't make the actual pilgrimage journey, that this was kind of something you could do closer to home that would help you have a similar experience. And so they would place these at the cathedrals, at other places. And so, if, like I said, if you couldn't afford or couldn't make the travel to go on a huge pilgrimage, you could at least walk the labyrinth and have a personal experience. So in recent years, there's been a resurgence of interest, and so the labyrinth movement in the United States, a lot of the material places at about in the 1980s. There became kind of this reawakening of people getting really interested in the labyrinth process and walking the labyrinth path, and there's several organizations that popped up to show people how to build labyrinths and to have labyrinth workshops, and so you started seeing them pop up in more places in the United States instead of just on people's private property. And so right now, there are approximately 6,000 labyrinths that have been registered with the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator. And so that is a website you can go to and put in, I just put in Missouri, and that's how I found that 59 of those 6,000 are registered in Missouri, with one of those being our very own Unity of Springfield Labyrinth. And so you can put in a state, you can put in an actual city, and it will tell you if someone has registered their labyrinth on there, it will tell you where it is and whether it's on private property or public property, if there's hours of operation. It's kind of interesting. I had no idea that existed until I dove into this. Many of those are located at churches, but there's also places like hospitals, mental health program buildings, and recovery centers. And there's quite a few that are on private property where it's people have just, in a field or somewhere on their land, they've taken rocks and they've made their own labyrinth, or some of them are very intricate. Some of them are just a path that they mow in their grass, and they keep it maintained. Yes, LB?
There was a guy that was here yesterday. He's the one that started the Law of Attraction workshop, and he has one on his property in Sparta, and I believe it's registered, and if somebody contacts him, he'll meet him down there because the gate's locked. And I went down there one day, something was canceled, and I went down there, and you can park your car and jump the gate, and I walked it, and I had this conflict with something I was trying to do in my house for a couple of months. I couldn't figure out how to do it, and I walked the labyrinth, and then I was on my way home, and he had found out that I was there, so he met me part way, but when I got home, I knew exactly what to do. I solved it, and I fixed this thing, and I have probably walked his labyrinth 5 or 6 times. And every time I do, there's some kind of a change that is just amazing. And if anybody wants that information, I can give you the contact with him.
Okay.
Because it's really amazing to walk that. And we pulled rocks out of the stream to line it, and I helped when he was building it. So it's, I don't know, 6, 7 years old maybe.
Nice.
But it's...
Yeah, I don't know if I saw that one on the registry.
It's just the other side of Sparta, maybe 3 miles.
Okay.
And so it's not real far. And he is... Do you know
He's
Steve?
come to, Steve.
Yeah.
I can't remember his last name.
None.
None, that's right. Yeah, he does come here occasionally.
Yeah, he was here for Abe yesterday.
Yeah, and he'll come to church once in a while too.
No.
Okay. Very
So,
cool.
that's kind of, if you really want to walk it, I can give you his information.
Okay, thank you. So there's 2 styles of labyrinth that have become kind of the most prevalent. So they're what you'll see most often. The first one is the Cretan style labyrinth.
Did you say that was the most popular one?
No, it is. There's 2 that are. So this is one style.
Okay.
That is popular, and so here I grabbed some pictures of some that people have built. So that one you can see is in a field. It's stones. have been laid in the path so that you can still walk on the ground and have that connection to soil when you're in the labyrinth. And then here's another one that's interesting, where there's actually like an inset where you walk in that. So very interesting. Now the second one, which we should recognize, is the Chartres style labyrinth.
That's what his is.
And so this is maybe what we're familiar with, because this is what we have here. This is the one at Unity Village, is this style of labyrinth. And so the thing with this style is that there are different quadrants. So this is a 4 quadrant. But apparently there are some that go up to even like 8 or 12 quadrants. Like if you get it really large, you can break it into more, I guess that wouldn't be a quadrant, would it? Sections, whatever you would call. But there were like 8 to 12 on these really massive ones. So really cool. So there's one that, if you can tell from the context there, like it looks in a beachy area, but those little things around the edge are shrubs, so that shows you how the scale of that is quite large. Here's an indoor one that is laid in the floor.
Wow, I wonder what building that is.
Is that Charles?
That's obviously huge.
Yes, I realized after I had grabbed these pictures that I should have put the places that they were in, and I didn't go back. I didn't go back and find them all.
That could be the one in the cathedral.
I think it is one of the ones in a cathedral. I just don't want to incorrectly identify which one. So that one should look familiar to us. There's our very own Unity Labyrinth, and like I said, it's behind the teen house. So currently we have the pod in the parking lot, and so if you walked behind the pod and behind the teen house, that's where you're going to find our labyrinth. And it is a beautiful labyrinth that Jessica Quinn has worked very hard to maintain over the years. I know she's repainted it, I think, at least twice that I'm aware of, to try to keep the lines crisp. And the teens have often done the upkeep on that for us. And then this one, that was the best picture I could find of the current labyrinth at Unity Village. And so that's the other thing I wanted to say is, while we were at Unity Village, we had the opportunity to hear some things that are coming to the village, things that are being changed. And so one of the things that they are updating and creating a new space for is the labyrinth. And part of that is, as you can see, it is in a parking lot. Currently, it's a very large section of parking lot. But as they make other updates and bring other opportunities into Unity Village, part of it is that they need the parking, and the other part is that they really wanted something that looks more permanent. And the pavement gets hot and all of that. So what they're doing is moving the labyrinth closer to the fountain area and more central with everything else so that it will flow. And I don't have the exact picture that we were shown, but it's going to be something more like this, where it is pavers that are laid out in the pattern. And I think it's still going to be, my understanding was that it was still going to be as large as the current labyrinth, just in this really nice paved stone. And like I said, right off the one of the sides where the fountains and all the beautiful buildings are in the middle of Unity Village. So that I'm excited. I had to walk the current one in case that was our last time to get to walk it while we were there. But then I'm really excited for this new experience that they're creating. The other thing, and Paul, I've lost his name. Is it Bill?
Jim Blake? Jim Blake.
What he let us know also is that he's always felt like there should be benches in the middle of the labyrinth, so that when you get to that center spot, if you want to stay there for a moment and really let things come to you, that there would be a comfortable place for you to sit and contemplate and let those ideas come to you and then leave. There's always been benches on the outside for when you exit the labyrinth, but there's not been a place to really like sit and be in the center. And so that's something he's excited about, is that's in the plans, is to have a few benches there
It's really
as well.
beautiful, with the pavers, they're really beautiful.
It is. And I think, easier to maintain instead of repainting a parking lot every so many years, and worried about cracks in the pavement and weeds coming through and all of that. It can get to look, I know we've struggled with that, maintaining our own labyrinth. And so I really think this is going to be just a beautiful area for people to experience in Unity Village. And like I said, this isn't the exact one he showed us, but it was something similar to this. It's going to be very grand. Went too far. That was my oh no sound, for any of you who are wondering what that little squeak was. So the most common way to use a labyrinth, many of us may be familiar with that, but I got to thinking some people may not walk the labyrinth because they've never really had that experience or had anyone, tell them what that looks like. So using the labyrinth before entering, kind of taking some deep breaths, considering a question, a prayer, an area for guidance that you're going to focus on. And then you enter into the labyrinth. Again, there's one entrance. And so you enter in, and as you're following the path, you just concentrate on your steps, let everything else melt away. You might allow yourself to repeat the question, the prayer, your focus area that you're looking for. You may have a chant or a mantra, something that is personal to you that you start out as you enter the labyrinth, going through. And then when you reach the center, you sit or stand with your eyes closed, remembering to breathe. Allow any feelings or thoughts to come and just kind of let that come to you and stay there for as long as you need for that to happen. And then when you're ready, you begin the exit. And during that exit, you're just reflecting on the thoughts or feelings that you experienced in the center, letting that kind of wash over you, letting it settle in with your current self. And then when you reach the exit, many people say you might find it helpful to sit there and reflect again, just really, really let it set in. Or some people will place a journal outside of the labyrinth so that when they exit and everything is still very fresh and going through, they can pick up that journal and start writing down all of the thoughts and feelings that came through with the labyrinth. So that part's a really personal part, whether you do your best work letting it kind of ruminate and sit in your mind, or whether you need a person that needs to get it out on paper, or maybe you're not a journaling person, but you do things in drawings, and so maybe you have something available when you come out of the labyrinth so you can create some work of art that is meaningful for that experience for you. So there's really no wrong way to do the labyrinth. So it's not, I think some people may hesitate because it might look intimidating, or they're kind of like, oh, I'm just going to walk this path, but what am I even doing? And so it's just another form of meditative practice. LB, yeah?
I think Steve said that his is, you probably walk, I think it's 3/4 of a mile by the time you go in and out, as long as if you stay on the path. So it's a good walk, and he's got stumps. I think Steve said it's like 3/4 of a mile to walk it, and he has stumps in the middle, so you have a place to sit. But I'm thinking it's about that long of a walk to get in and out.
Yeah, so most labyrinths, I mean, if the idea is to get your mind relaxed and get you to that space, it's got to be a little bit of a distance, just so you have time, your body has time to get in that that space, right? So yes, like the labyrinth that
Rewires your brain.
yes, the labyrinth at Unity Village, I don't know, I think it takes us probably
40
45 minutes. Yeah, I was gonna say between 35 and 45 minutes each time that we've walked that, and that's going at just a nice slow pace. I've seen people at Unity Village walking the labyrinth and doing like incorporating yoga poses throughout, or different body movements that must work for them to put them in a better space. And so that they probably take like an hour to go through, because they stop periodically. They kind of have a routine. I've watched some. It's really beautiful to watch some of those people that obviously have a really strong labyrinth practice. And anyway, that's been a nice treat a few times we were there.
After we went, Unity of Springfield went there. The next weekend I went there to a conference, a vegan conference at Unity Village. And we did a group walk, which I had never done before. And it was, it was pretty interesting because there were about 40 of us all together. But we did a circle around the labyrinth before we started, and then we all walked in total silence. And, some people walked a little bit faster and some slower, but nobody passed anybody or anything like that. But it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. And then when we all were finished, we did, again, the circle around the labyrinth and did another kind of a ceremony. And it was just the most amazing experience. It really was. It helps you to go inside, I'd say, and but anyway, it was powerful. So
Awesome.
I've done it. When Steve usually has one or two parties down there every year, and we, just randomly, whoever wants to, but there's a lot of times I've been on the Labyrinth with 10 people, and some people walk slow, you just go past them. And when you're on your way back, you're passing them because they're, coming in and out. And it never is an issue because you're in that space, and there's just a really congenial energy in that. And so it's never been a problem to pass people if they're, slower or faster. So it works that way too.
Very nice. So I think that would be another tip that we're all hearing, is that if you were going to walk the labyrinth here at Unity, if you go out there and someone's already walking, it's not bad etiquette to go ahead and enter as well. Or you could do it as with someone, if you had a small group or someone you were walking with. So the power of the labyrinth. So this comes from Exploring the Labyrinth by Melissa Gale West. And in this book, she says, since the destination is assured, there are no obstacles to overcome, what remains for the labyrinth walker is simply the deeply meditative and symbolic discipline of setting one foot in front of the other, of honoring the journey itself and what it has to teach, and the mind can be stilled and attention paid to the body, the wisdom of the heart, and the graces of being rather than doing. So the labyrinth is seen as an archetypal map of the healing journey, and the walk is a potent physical metaphor for the journeys of healing, spiritual and emotional growth, and transformation. So again, like we've talked about, it starts at the perimeter, the walk does, and then the path, like any other journey, has its twists and turns, and we are drawn closer to and then away from the center and then back close. Does that sound familiar? So it really is that symbol of our life's journey, that sometimes we move closer to the center, sometimes we move farther away, but that we're ever on that path that is seeking center and seeking that connection. So once we've encountered the center, we begin our path back to the outer world. And so like exiting the labyrinth, you're like re-entering your now moment of what's going on in your life and how you're going to take that connection. Again, there's my little noise. Sorry. So integration of the body and spirit, and this is what we've been talking about, what you guys have shared as well. So at the most basic level, walking the labyrinth restores our connection to our bodies and allows us to reduce stress and tension. With the removal of stress and tension, and attention on the outside world, your body can relax into a sacred space. And so one of the things, remember I mentioned that we're starting to see labyrinths at places like hospitals and hospices and mental health centers and recovery centers. And so there's actual, there was some research as well as just some kind of anecdotal evidence that these labyrinth walks actually reduce tension and help people feel more grounded in their bodies and in their connection. And so there was one story that I was reading from a nurse at a hospice facility, or maybe she was at a mental health well-being center, but they will often encourage people to go walk the labyrinth. They have one in their courtyard, and they will encourage that when people are feeling anxious and overwhelmed. And so one of the things she did was when she was encouraging people to do that, she would do their vitals before they went into the labyrinth, and then she would do their vitals when they came back out. And she said every single time there was a lowering of blood pressure, there was a decrease in heart rate, that she would make observation notes sometimes, and a person who entered the labyrinth very kind of tight and just you could see the anxiety in their body or the stress in their body. She said they would exit the labyrinth, body relaxed, they're breathing freely. They could actually then talk about what had been bothering them before they went in. So just there's all this evidence of whether you're using it as a spiritual tool or not, it does impact our brain in a way that calms our body system. And so some people are just using it for stress and anxiety, while others are trying to get that real deep spirit connection. I read one account of an oncology center, a cancer treatment center, that is using a labyrinth walk as part of treatment, and seeing those who are regularly walking the labyrinth having better results in their healing and recovery from cancer. So lots of interesting stuff out there. I also read about Robert Fair, who is mostly retired now, but he spent 23 years constructing labyrinths and teaching others how to do so. He was kind of part of that labyrinth movement that started in the 80s. He's written a few books. He started some organizations, and he used to do workshops all the time on how to best use a labyrinth, as well as he would show people how to build them. And so, of course, he has one in his backyard. And so one of the things he said was, when I walk my backyard labyrinth, I'm not accomplishing, not striving, not ticking things off my to-do list. My body is trained now. I walk out the door, and before I even get to the entrance of the labyrinth, I start to relax, because my body knows this is a time out. It's time for me to just be with me. The labyrinth represents getting back to my own center, my own body, and my soul. I thought that was really beautiful too. And again, a reminder that when we put these things in regular practice, this magnificent vehicle of a body and mind that we have brought into this physical world, realizes and recognizes when those things are available. And so, for him to say, as soon as I walk out the back door headed in that direction, he already starts to feel the positive impacts of what's going to come, because his body is primed and it says, yes, here's my chance to connect with Source. And so, like I said, just a reminder, because I know that I am just as, I want to say, not really guilt, but I also get distracted by things that are going on in this physical realm, and I say things like, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I've got all these other things going, and then I sit and I read every post that everyone's posted on Facebook all day, and 45 minutes later, an hour later, I think, gosh, man, I could have been meditating for at least part of that time. I could have done something that would have been much more beneficial. And so I'm trying to catch those moments now and take those opportunities more, and I'm not beating myself up too bad about it. But things like this are just a good reminder that I would much rather spend 30 minutes walking a labyrinth than 30 minutes scrolling social media. It would be much more beneficial to my well-being. And so whether it's this or something else. So then we've already done a little bit of this, but I was just going to ask, has anyone ever built a labyrinth or have labyrinth experiences they'd like to share?
Well, I did want to just mention that when we did go to Unity Village, not this last time, but it was pre-COVID, which was probably, 2 years ago? Maybe not that long ago, but there was a person there, a man there, and his wife, who Sue knew well because they were former members of Unity of Springfield. And he was the one who built the labyrinth both at Unity Village and the one here. And I wish I remembered his name, but I don't. But I thought that was, kind of unique, and it made me feel, wow, what a connection there that, someone from Springfield was responsible for doing that. So no, I don't have any experience with it, but wouldn't it be kind of neat if we could maybe do one of our classes, or just have, just a formally recognized time that as a church we could go out and walk the labyrinth? I think that'd be really exciting.
I mean, it's a tool we have. It's right there.
I
We pull in this parking lot. Yes. We drive away. We walk by it.
I think of all the years I've been here, and how many times have I walked the labyrinth? Maybe 2 or 3.
I know that I was having the same. But then when I go to Unity Village, it's like on the must-do list. Like, I will not leave Unity Village without walking the labyrinth. And I think, but then I'm here every week. I don't make that same. I don't have that same connection or that same. I don't put it on my list of things that must be done while I'm here. And I say must be, like, for my own, like, it's so. So beautiful for me that I'm like, oh no, I have to do that every time I'm there because I always get something from it, and so I don't want to leave. Well, and I wanted to point out this picture, I don't know if you guys can see it if you're too far away, but so this is a group of people standing on the outside, and what they've done is they have painted a labyrinth on the grass with some, I don't know, hopefully they're not killing the grass with the paint, but they have so this is a temporary labyrinth. They've done some activity and they have worked together to create this painted labyrinth. So they don't have to be permanent, and that was one of the things that Robert Fair said, and was in a lot of the material that I looked at. There were others that created, which this I really feel I can tell is paint. But there were other people that talked about creating them with sawdust. And so they would, put that out in the pattern, and they would all use the labyrinth for whatever workshop or thing they were doing. And then it was just sawdust that could, as it rained and got settled back into the ground, it was going to benefit the place that they left. And so that was really cool. So I'll tell you, I wanted a couple of the things from this most recent labyrinth walk, and again, I always get something, but this was the first time for me that so walking into the center, I had my thing that I was focused on, and I got to the center, and just very clear messages started just spiraling through my brain, and it wasn't anything I had been thinking before I entered the labyrinth. But it was very strong, but it came in that center moment as you messages. So you are this, you can do that, those kind of messages. And as I started walking out, I was I was trying to repeat in my mind all of the things that had come so that I wouldn't forget anything. And the interesting thing was about halfway through the exit, without any conscious thought of my own, the message changed. All of those things I was repeating changed from "you are" to "I am." I can. So it made this shift. And afterwards, as I was reflecting, I feel like that's the moment where maybe I accepted the message instead of instead of that outer force telling me you can do this or you are this. It like integrated in that moment, and it just became I am, I can, I will, I have. And so I think that's what was so powerful for this one. I've had others where like definitely messages came, but I haven't felt such a strong, like, I don't know, in that moment of switching from the you message to the I message, and becoming the I am, it just really felt like a shot to the soul, like bing, there it is. There it is. And when it comes like that, it's a little harder to deny, right? Because if you're getting it as you are this or you can that, you have to like buy into that. You have to believe it, or there's some disconnect. But man, when it hits you as an I am message, that's so powerful. So I think that's why I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole way home, and really what that meant for me. And then that has stuck with me. Like, it hasn't faded from that moment. I still catch myself like in quiet moments. It's those messages that are still coming forward, and then shaping, are you taking the actions to line up with those messages? And so that's the important part too, is when we get still and we get those messages from Divine Mind, and especially when they come as the I am statements, well then your actions have to line up with that, right? And so that's the beauty and the power of some of these practices. And so, it's all about finding center. And so I just wanted to bring out Labyrinths as just another tool we have. Some people may love them, some people might not like them. Even though they're widely used in some Christian settings, there are, of course, some fundamental believers that feel like they're tied to like pagan ritual and things like that, and so they're not going to use them. But at Unity, it's another like I said, another tool for meditative practice. So you have just meditation, we have yoga, there's a Buddhist practice of intentional walking where you're not in a labyrinth, but it is very much the same in like focusing on one foot in front of the other, hearing the world around you. I'm not as familiar with that, but in reading some of this, people were talking about that if you didn't have a labyrinth available, that was another option, is just take an intentional walk and focus on your steps and your breathing, and also, pick a path where you, again, don't have to make a lot of decisions. You don't have to stop for traffic. You find somewhere that you can just walk and not have to worry about anything else. Of course, prayer, journaling. The other thing Unity Village has is the 12 Powers Garden, which was also, Lisa and I did that this time, and just really powerful. It's just a circle. But along the circle, there are stations for each of the 12 powers, and there's a bench and a little sculpture that represents that power. And so the idea is you can start in one spot and, again, walk the path to each station. You can stop, reflect on that power for as long as you want, and then move on to the next one. And that was also just a really beautiful practice of, just staying in that centered, open space. And it's a circle. So you don't have to think about it. You just go from one station to the next. What else would you guys add to the list? What practices do you have that are that same kind of experience?
Well, I was just going to add that up in the Bighorn Mountains in Montana, where I had been to a couple times, way up on the highest point. Beautiful, beautiful area, scenery and everything. There is a medicine wheel, and it's native, of course. And it's been around supposedly for who knows how long. You know, they estimate it to be thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not exactly what you'd call a labyrinth, but it is a circle, and it does have the wheels or the spokes, if you want to call it that. And then it does have ceremonial aspect to it also. I'm guessing in somewhat of the same fashion as what our labyrinth would be. And I think it's really unique. What I never really gave labyrinths as much thought as what you've put into this, and this is really amazing, and thank you for that. But I love it that it ties a lot of religions together. It ties a lot of spiritual foundations together. And in one aspect, it kind of brings us all closer together.
Mm-hmm.
All as who we really are is that one.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and you know, going through, if you get on the Labyrinth locator, that's what was interesting, is kind of scrolling down through even just the ones in Missouri. So there were quite a few Episcopal churches. I saw some Methodist churches. Saw a Baptist church on there, which kind of surprised me.
Now that is interesting.
Of course, several Unity churches and places like that. But it was really, it wasn't like you get on there and you only see Unity churches or you only see a certain group. Their benefit and the practice of walking labyrinths is really, you know, spanning a lot of different spiritual practices. So,
were there any other labyrinths in Springfield that you?
not that I saw, no.
Well, that's kind of unique. We can brag on that then.
Yes.
There's
James
one in
posted
Willard.
about the one next to our apartment complex.
Oh, there is.
The church.
Oh,
Right
wait,
there
okay.
on Fremont.
which church is it on Fremont?
He'd be able to tell you.
Well, Fremont in what area?
Fremont Republic.
Oh, okay.
Down
Okay.
Right there.
Great.
They just may not be on the
Yeah.
they may not have registered it, because who would, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe some people when they're building a labyrinth, but I think a lot of people, there's probably more of them out there that people did not know there was a place they could go and register their labyrinth so that other people would know it's there.
There's one in Willard. I know the lady came to LOA and talked about meditation, and I think she was like really high up in Mary Kay, and when she retired, she started some kind of meditation thing, and she has a labyrinth, and it's somewhere near Willard.
Okay.
That's cool. Wow.
For those of us who are not really great meditators or not really great at doing nothing and just sitting within our own self in there, the labyrinth practice is one that can be incorporated anytime in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I do something similar just when I do my morning chores cleaning my house. I set intentions, and as I take steps and I walk, and even while I'm doing my dishes, it's the same thing. So for those of us who probably aren't going to use this method, that you can create your own in just your everyday life.
Yes, and thank you, Wendy, because that's why I put this slide up there of like, it's just about finding center. So this was just another tool that I got really intrigued by, and it really had, you know, I had a meaningful experience. But yes, it's not going to work for everyone. And for some people, like you said, sitting and meditating for 30 minutes, they've just never gotten in the groove with that. But it's funny you mentioned dishes, because I think the same thing. Like washing dishes, you don't have to think too much about what you're doing, right? You put the dish in the soapy water, you scrub it, you rinse it. Like there's a system to that you can just kind of get into a groove, and you can let your brain go to a different space. Dan?
I use that a lot. Actually, I have a step counter on my phone, and I use it a lot, particularly when I'm out working in my garden and yard. And for me, that's meditation. And I have a certain number, like 2,500 steps as a minimum a day. Most people will use that just as out walking, basically. But for me, it's an everyday meditation type of thing, because it's just becomes so much of who you are at that point. I'd also like to comment a little bit about what Paul was saying about the medicine wheel. Those are very popular in the West. The one he's speaking of there's about 12 that have been identified that are very similar to that. Several of them are in Wyoming. Everybody thinks of Wyoming because of the national parks and all that kind of thing. But as you go up into Montana, they become very popular. And most of them are over 1,000 years old and have quite a history to them. And are very similar in my own mind, as Paul has said, to the idea of the labyrinth and the idea of the walking and having a sense of communion, because that's basically what you've been speaking of. The two is the idea of communing with that eternal spirit that is not only within us, but so much of a part of the nature that's around us as well.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, that concludes my discussion on labyrinths this morning. Let me get to, I'm timed out. So a few announcements. Next Sunday, the 9:15 class will be hosted by Les McClelland, and he is speaking on the mechanics of consciousness. Tonight at 6 o'clock, is this true still, James? Oh, he's not in here. I think that was last week, actually. The Fall Fashion Boutique is October 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30. The grounds cleanup is October 23rd at 9 a.m. Spooktruncular is October 30th. That's a Saturday this year because Halloween is actually on a Sunday. And so the youth department is getting very excited about Spooktruncular this year. It's going to be on the 30th from 5 to 7. I would really encourage people to come and decorate a trunk and be here to experience this. Whether you have kids or not, the kids enjoy it so much. It is such a fun time. They just come in all their cool costumes, and they really love that we show up and do that event for them. So it's near and dear to my heart, so put that out there. We are going to have the fire pit fired up with hot dogs and just all kinds of fun stuff. We also have the talent show coming up Friday, November 12th at 7 o'clock. So if you have a special talent, hidden or obvious, be thinking about what you might want to do for the talent show in November. All right. We want to circle up.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry, I don't know.
Oh,
Do we have something going? Is that what it says? We have something going on tonight?
I thought we did. Okay.